The frost clung to the edges of the window, a thin veil of winter morning light spilling into the small kitchen. Steam curled from the mug in my hands as the phone on the table buzzed. I reached for it without much thought, expecting the usual good morning message or maybe a reminder about the day ahead. Instead, the words on the screen felt like they'd been carved into me with a dull blade. Dad, maybe don't come today. It's better this way. I stared at the glow of the message, my thumb hovering as if a reply might come to me if I waited long enough. I read it again and again. Each time, it felt heavier. Outside, the cold wind rattled against the pane, but the chill I felt was coming from somewhere deeper. My daughter's name at the top of the message thread seemed almost foreign now, like it belonged to someone else entirely. A dozen moments rushed back, uninvited, her tiny hands gripping my finger when she first learned to walk, the sound of her laughter echoing in the living room during rainy afternoons, the way her eyes lit up when I'd surprise her with ice cream after school. I had carried her through scraped knees and sleepless nights, and through years when I worked 2 jobs just to make sure she never had to feel the weight of the world the way I once had. The kettle clicked off in the background, but I didn't move. My breath fogged the screen as I held it closer, as if studying the words might reveal a hidden meaning, one that didn't cut so sharply. But there was no hidden kindness in them, just the plain truth she wanted me to hear. I could have stayed. I could have let her wish stand, found some quiet way to pass the day while pretending it didn't matter. But something in me, something old and instinctive, refused. It wasn't stubbornness, and it wasn't pride. It was the same thing that made me get up at 3 in the morning when she had nightmares, the same thing that made me walk miles when the car broke down so I could still bring her medicine when she was sick. I set the phone down gently, as if the weight of it might shatter something fragile. The coat hanging by the door looked heavier than usual, but I reached for it anyway. The air outside bit at my cheeks as I stepped into it, locking the door behind me. I didn't know exactly what I'd find when I got there. I didn't know how she would react to seeing me, but I knew one thing for certain. She didn't know. I was already there. The road to the venue was long, and the sky was the pale, muted blue of a winter morning. My hand stayed steady on the steering wheel, but my mind drifted, slipping into the years that had shaped us both. I remembered the first time she wobbled down the street on her little pink bicycle. Her hair had been tied up in messy pigtails, the training wheels just taken off. She'd been so afraid, clutching the handlebars until her knuckles went white. I ran alongside her, one hand on the seat, the other outstretched just in case. "I've got you," I told her, even as I let go for the first time. She didn't know it, but I ran behind her until she found her balance. The joy on her face when she realized she was riding alone could have lit the whole block. There were nights, years later, when the house was silent except for the scratch of a pen and the rustle of textbook pages. I would make her tea, set it by her elbow, and sit on the couch pretending to read while keeping an eye on the clock. At midnight, she'd slump forward, exhausted, and I'd nudge her awake, coax her into bed, and promise her she was doing enough, even when she thought she wasn't. The sharpest memory came from the spring of her last year in high school. Prom night was approaching, and the dress she had ordered online arrived a size too small. I could still see the way she stood there, eyes glossy with disappointment, fingers clutching the fabric like it was the end of the world. I had never sewn more than a loose button, but that night, I sat at the dining table with her grandmother's old sewing machine. I followed online tutorials until my eyes burned, adjusting seams and letting out fabric until the dress fit her perfectly. When she twirled in front of the mirror the next morning, the sound of her laughter was worth every pinprick on my fingers. After her mother passed, the world tilted in a way I could never quite straighten. There were bills stacked on the counter and groceries that seemed to vanish faster than I could bring them in. I took whatever work I could find. Early mornings loading trucks, late nights stocking shelves, weekends repairing fences for neighbors. I kept my own needs quiet, always making sure she had new shoes before I thought of replacing mine. Every sacrifice felt like a promise kept, though I never said it out loud, that she would never feel the emptiness I had known. She'd have the education, the comfort, the choices her mother and I had dreamed for her. And yet, as the miles slipped by beneath my tires, I felt the sting of that message in my chest again. All those years, all those moments. They lived in me like old photographs, worn at the edges but still bright. Whether she remembered them or not didn't matter. I did, and that was enough to keep me driving. The house was still when I got back from my morning walk, the kind of stillness that makes every sound feel louder. The old floorboards creaked under my feet as I made my way to the bedroom. I opened the wardrobe slowly, running my hand over the row of neatly hung clothes. Most of them were for work, sturdy jackets, worn shirts, but tucked near the end was the suit I kept for the rare moments that called for something more. It wasn't new. The fabric had softened over the years. The cuff showed the faintest sign of wear, but it was clean, pressed, and dignified. Not flashy, respectable. The kind of suit you could stand in without drawing the wrong kind of attention, yet still be remembered for wearing. I slipped it on, the weight of it settling on my shoulders like a quiet reminder of the day ahead. As I fastened each button, a thought rose in my mind, steady and certain. A father should see his daughter's milestones, even if she doesn't see him. I told myself that many times over the years, at school plays, recitals, and graduations, when my seat was in the back row or in the corner. My place was never about where I sat today. It was about being there. I moved to the mirror, straightening the tie she had once given me for Father's Day. It had a small, nearly invisible coffee stain near the edge, haze, from a morning years ago when she'd been rushing out the door and I'd caught her cup mid-fall. She'd laughed, called me her hero. I remembered the warmth of that moment as clearly as if it had been yesterday. On the dresser sat a small wooden box. The lid was smooth from years of handling, the edges darkened with time. I picked it up carefully, holding it for a long moment before slipping it into the inside pocket of my coat. Its weight was barely noticeable to the body, but to me, it carried years, stories, promises, and one truth she didn't yet know. I didn't open it. Not yet. The coat came last. Thick wool, deep charcoal, and heavier than it looked. I pulled it over my shoulders, feeling the quiet comfort of its warmth. The air outside would bite, but I was ready for that. I'd walked through harsher winters than this one. Before leaving, I stood in the hallway for a moment, letting my eyes rest on the framed photos along the wall. Her first day of school, her gap-toothed smile at 8 years old, her in a graduation gown, arms wrapped around me. I touched the glass lightly, then turned toward the door. The world outside was pale and cold, the kind of day where your breath follows you like a shadow. I stepped into it, the small box pressed close to my heart. Whatever waited for me, I would face it the same way I had faced every challenge for her, quietly, steadily, without turning away. The venue rose ahead like something out of a winter postcard. Tall windows glowing against the pale sky, wreaths of pine and ribbon framing the entrance. I pulled into the farthest corner of the parking lot, where the snow was still untouched, and sat for a moment with the engine off. People in fine coats hurried toward the doors, their breath curling into the air like soft smoke. I stepped inside before the crowd thickened. The sudden wash of warmth was almost startling, carrying with it the mingled scents of cinnamon, coffee, and polished wood. Soft music drifted from unseen speakers, weaving through the hum of conversation. The lighting was golden, gentle, casting a kind glow on every face it touched. I found a spot along the far wall, half hidden behind a tall potted plant and the curve of a pillar. From there, I could see almost everything without being seen myself. Guests were mingling in small clusters, their laughter carrying easily across the room. Coats were being shrugged off, hands clasped in greetings, cheeks brushed with quick kisses. There was a warmth to it all, a kind of easy joy that felt both close enough to touch and impossibly far away. Then I saw her. She stood near the center of the room, her back to me at first, talking animatedly to a group of friends I didn't recognize. When she turned, her face was lit with the kind of smile that belongs to someone at ease in the world they've built for themselves. She tossed her hair back as she laughed, a sound I knew better than my own heartbeat. For a moment, I could almost believe I was just another guest, welcome to walk up and join them. But I didn't move. I stayed in my quiet corner, my hands loosely folded in front of me. She didn't scan the room for me, didn't pause as if she expected me to be there. Her world was spinning without the thought of me in it, and I let it. Around me, the air was warm and bright, but in my little corner, there was a thin layer of winter still clinging to my shoulders. I didn't mind. I hadn't come to take up space. I had come to see her, even if she never saw me. I was about to shift my weight, maybe wander toward the refreshments, when a ripple of conversation caught my ear. It wasn't the words at first, but the tone, that light, almost careless lilt she used when she wanted to make something sound unimportant. My daughter's voice. I turned my head slightly, careful not to draw attention. She was just a few feet away now, angled toward a man I didn't know. He was holding a drink, nodding as she spoke. I just didn't want him here, she said, a small shrug lifting her shoulders. Not really part of my life anymore. The words landed without warning, sharp and cold. They didn't come with the sting of a sudden wound, but the deep ache of one that had been there, hidden, all along. My fingers tightened around the paper cup in my hand, though my face stayed still, as if carved from something that couldn't break. The man beside her made a sympathetic sound, something non-committal, and she went on. It's not like he'd fit in. I mean, he's quiet, awkward, and honestly, I just didn't want any drama. It's easier this way. I let the words pass over me like wind through bare branches. I didn't flinch, didn't move, just stood where I was. If anyone glanced my way, they'd have thought I was simply lost in thought, not listening to the most unvarnished truth I'd heard from her in years. For a moment, I let myself drift away from the scene. I saw her as a little girl again, in pigtails, her hand wrapped around mine as we crossed the street. I remembered the way she used to run toward me when I came home, her small frame colliding with my legs in a hug that could have knocked the air out of me. That child was still in there somewhere. I told myself that, even as the version standing before me seemed like a stranger. She laughed at something the man said, her voice light, her eyes bright. There was no malice in it, no cruelty, just a simple conviction that her world no longer had a place for me. That, in some ways, hurt more than any sharp word could have. I sipped my coffee, the warmth of it grounding me, and let my gaze move across the room as if a conversation was no more important than the clink of glasses or the rustle of coats at the door. I didn't step forward, didn't make my presence known. This wasn't the moment to reclaim space or demand acknowledgement. Sometimes the most powerful thing a person can do is to remain steady, silent, and watching, while the truth speaks for itself. My expression stayed unreadable, a mask I'd learned to wear long ago. But inside, something in me shifted. I had come here knowing I might not be wanted. Now I knew exactly how unwanted I was, and still, I remained. From my place in the corner, I began to notice faces I didn't recognize, men in tailored suits, women with sleek hair and glittering jewelry, all moving through the room with a quiet confidence that spoke of belonging. Their laughter had a different rhythm, their greetings just a little more formal. It didn't take much to piece it together. These were her fiancés people. They moved in a loose circle around him, clapping his back, shaking his hand, exchanging warm pleasantries. I watched as she floated easily between them, her smile practiced but genuine enough to pass. She belonged here, at least in their eyes. I shifted my gaze toward the long row of tables set for the evening. Place cards stood in neat little rows at each seat, names written in looping gold script. It was the kind of detail she would have fussed over for weeks. I scanned them slowly, though I already knew the truth before my eyes confirmed it. My name wasn't there. It didn't sting as sharply as I thought it might. Instead, there was a slow, familiar heaviness, like an old coat slipping over my shoulders again. I'd been left out before, though never quite so deliberately. Still, I told myself, a seat isn't what I came for. In the far corner, a small refreshment table stood unattended, steam curling from a silver urn of coffee. I walked to it quietly, each step measured, blending into the ebb and flow of the room. No one looked my way. I poured myself a cup, the rich aroma rising like a small comfort in the midst of the distance I felt. Sugar packets and cream sat neatly to the side. I took neither, preferring the bite of it plain. Leaning slightly against the table, I sipped slowly, watching without watching. Across the room, She laughed again, that bright, ringing sound that used to be my favorite music. I saw her tuck a strand of hair behind her ear, lean closer to the man beside her, and for a moment, I imagined she might glance up and spot me. But she didn't. So I stood there, the quiet witness in the corner, my presence unnoticed, my coffee cooling in my hands, content to let the world go on without my name on any card. The voices came in fragments, carried on the current of the room. I wasn't trying to listen, not exactly. But when your own name drifts through the air, you can't help but follow it. It's just easier this way, her voice said again, softer now, almost conspiratorial. She was speaking to a woman I didn't know. Elegant, poised, one of the fiancés people. The woman's brows knit together. But he's your father, isn't he? A faint sigh, then my daughter's reply. Yes, but you have to understand. They don't see him the way I do. To them, he's a nobody. He doesn't have anything to contribute, not like your side of the family. I didn't want anyone feeling awkward or embarrassed. The word hung there, embarrassed, as if it had a weight all its own. I let it settle, heavy in my chest. She went on, her tone carefully measured. It's not that I don't care. I wanted everything to be perfect. And him, well, he's not exactly the kind of presence that impresses people. The woman nodded in a way that said she understood, but my gaze had already dropped to the coffee cup in my hands. I swirled the dark liquid slowly, my reflection breaking apart in its surface. It wasn't so long ago, or maybe it was, that she would introduce me with pride. At her school open houses, she'd beam when she pointed me out to her teachers. At her college graduation, she had clung to my arm as we posed for photos, telling anyone who'd listen how much I'd done for her. I remembered the way she'd once bragged to her friends about my cooking, calling me the best chef in the world when all I'd made was a simple Sunday roast. Or the time she brought me along to her first apartment, insisting I meet her neighbors because, in her words, everyone should know my dad. And now, here I was, something to hide. An awkward shadow in the corner. A risk she couldn't afford in front of people whose approval mattered more. The coffee had gone lukewarm, but I drank it anyway, letting the bitterness coat my tongue. I didn't move toward her. I didn't clear my throat to make my presence known. Some truths don't need to be challenged in the moment. Sometimes they need to breathe, to take their full shape in the air. She might never notice I'd heard her, never realize the way those words had threaded themselves into me. But I would remember, not out of anger, but because forgetting would mean erasing the parts of her that used to be proud to stand beside me. And I wasn't ready to lose those, too. I was halfway through another sip of coffee when I noticed her watching me from across the room. An older woman, maybe in her late 60s, with silver hair swept into an elegant chignon. Her dress was understated but refined, the kind of style that spoke of quiet confidence rather than the need to be noticed. She made her way toward me with the ease of someone who didn't mind stepping out of the center of attention. When she reached the refreshment table, she poured herself a cup, glanced at me, and offered a small, knowing smile. "You've been standing here a while," she said, her voice warm but edged with curiosity. "Not much of a mingler." I returned the smile faintly. I suppose I've always been better at watching than talking. Her eyes lingered on me, thoughtful. Watching tells you more than words ever could. She stirred her coffee slowly, then leaned just slightly closer. "You're her father, aren't you?" There was no judgment in her tone, only certainty. I nodded. "I am." For a moment, she seemed to study me as if measuring something beyond the surface. "Strange," she murmured. "I would have expected to see you front and center. But you're here, quietly, like you belong without needing to be announced." I didn't answer that. I didn't need to. She sipped her coffee, eyes still on me. "You know, not everyone here sees clearly. Sometimes people mistake the loudest for the most important. But I've always believed real presence doesn't need a spotlight." There was something in the way she said it, gentle, deliberate, that made me look at her a little closer. Her smile returned, softer this time. "They don't all know who you are." "Not really, but I think I do." Before I could ask what she meant, someone called her name from across the room. She gave me a small nod, the kind that feels like the end of a conversation but also a promise. Then she walked away, disappearing into the crowd as if she'd never been there at all. I stood for a moment longer, her words turning over in my mind. They don't all know who you are, but I think I do. It was the first time that evening I felt the smallest shift in the air, like something was already in motion, even if no one else could see it yet. The evening had settled into its rhythm, glasses clinking, laughter rolling easily from table to table, the low hum of polite conversation filling every corner. I had drifted a little closer to the center of the room, still careful to remain just outside the circle of attention. From here, I could see her at the head table, her hand resting lightly on her fiancé's arm, her smile fixed but radiant under the warm lights. The host, a tall man in a dark suit with a voice that carried, stepped up to the microphone near the band. He tapped it once, the sound cutting through the chatter until the room stilled. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, "before we continue, we have a very special acknowledgement to make. This couple's future, their new home, their start together, has been made possible in part by the extraordinary generosity of one guest here tonight." A ripple of curiosity moved through the crowd. Guests exchanged glances, murmuring. I stayed still, my coffee cup now empty, hands loosely clasped in front of me. The host continued, "It's only right that we thank this person publicly, so everyone here knows what they've done." And then I saw her. The older woman from earlier was walking toward me, her steps deliberate, her eyes holding mine. I felt the air shift as conversations quieted further, the sound of heels on polished floor somehow loud in the silence. When she reached me, she smiled, not the polite smile of strangers, but the warm, certain smile of someone who knows exactly what they are doing. "Come with me," she said softly, her hand gesturing toward the center of the room. I hesitated for a fraction of a second, glancing toward the head table. My daughter's expression faltered the moment our eyes met, the confident ease draining from her face, replaced by confusion, then something sharper. Whispers began immediately, moving like a current through the guests. The older woman turned to the host and spoke into the microphone, her voice carrying, "This is the man who made sure the couple will have a home to begin their life together. Without him, this night would not be what it is." All eyes were on me now, the same eyes that had glanced past me all evening, that hadn't marked my presence. I walked forward slowly, the weight of the small wooden box in my coat pocket like a steady pulse against my side. I didn't search for anyone's approval, and I didn't let my gaze linger on my daughter for long. I simply stepped into the light, not to claim attention, but to stand where truth could be seen. Around us, the whispers swelled. Some were curious, some surprised, and a few, I could tell, were suddenly realizing they'd misjudged the man in the corner. It was the first time all night I wasn't invisible. The microphone felt light in my hand, though the air around me had grown heavy with expectation. Dozens of faces turned toward me, some curious, some polite, a few already leaning in as if they might catch a secret before anyone else. I let my gaze travel over them, pausing only briefly on my daughter. Her smile was gone now, replaced by something she was trying hard to mask. I reached into the inside pocket of my coat and drew out the small wooden box. Its surface caught the light, the grain of the wood warm and familiar under my fingertips. I set it gently on the nearest table, flicked open the brass clasp, and lifted the lid. Inside lay a set of house keys, their metal glinting under the golden lights, and beneath them, the neatly folded deed to a modest but beautiful home. I spoke without raising my voice, letting the words find their own space in the room. These belong to the couple, a place to start their life together, a place they can make their own. I looked at the keys for a moment before continuing. I was told not to come tonight, but I was already here. A murmur passed through the crowd, soft at first, then building into a wave of applause. People at the nearby tables nodded, some smiling with genuine warmth, others clapping because it was the polite thing to do. The sound filled the space, but I didn't let it settle inside me. I wasn't here for their approval. I glanced toward my daughter again. Her eyes were locked on the box, then on me, a flicker of something, maybe realization, maybe regret, breaking through her careful expression. She looked as if she'd just been shown the weight of something she'd nearly dropped without knowing. I closed the box and placed it back in my coat pocket. "I hope it serves you well," I said simply, and handed the microphone back to the host. There was nothing more to add. The older woman who had found me earlier gave me a small nod from across the room, as though to say, "Now they know." I returned the nod, then stepped back from the center into the same quiet space I'd occupied all evening. The applause faded, the conversations resumed, and the warmth of the lights shifted back to the couple. But something had changed. I could feel it in the way eyes followed me now, in the way her laughter didn't quite ring the same. She would go on with her evening, smiling for photographs, thanking guests. But somewhere in the back of her mind, the truth would sit, that on the night she thought she'd kept me away, I had been here all along, and I had given her something she might never truly be able to return. The room was still buzzing when I stepped away from the spotlight. Conversations picked up again in fragments. Glasses clinked. The music eased back in. But I felt no reason to stay. I had done what I came to do. I moved toward the coat rack at the far end of the hall, unnoticed at first. The chatter and laughter blurred into a distant hum, like a song I no longer recognized. My coat was exactly where I'd left it, the weight of the small wooden box still resting inside, now lighter in meaning because its purpose had been fulfilled. I slipped my arms into the sleeves and turned toward the door. The cold from outside pressed faintly through the glass, a reminder that winter was waiting. I had almost made it out when I heard her voice, softer now, hesitant. "Dad!" I turned just enough to meet her eyes. She was standing a few feet away, her posture unsure, as though she wasn't certain whether to come closer. Around us, people were still talking, but it felt like the air between us had gone quiet. I offered her the smallest of smiles, the kind that didn't ask for anything in return. "A father's presence," I said evenly, "is a choice, not an obligation." Her lips parted slightly, as if she wanted to answer, but no words came. I didn't wait for them. With one hand, I pushed open the heavy door, the rush of winter air wrapping around me. I stepped outside into the crisp night, my breath forming clouds in the glow of the streetlights. Behind me, the door eased shut with a muffled thud, sealing the warmth and noise of the celebration away. There was no bitterness in my stride, no urgency in my departure, just the steady rhythm of a man walking away from something he had already made peace with. Some moments aren't meant to be drawn out. Some farewells don't need an audience. And so I left, not as someone excluded, but as someone who had chosen exactly when and how to go. The night air was sharp, but it felt clean against my face as I walked to the far end of the parking lot. Each step crunched over a thin layer of frost, the sound steady in the quiet. The glow from the venue windows faded behind me, replaced by the stillness of the street and the faint hum of the city in the distance. I thought about all the times I had shown up for her, not for the applause, not for the gratitude, but because that's what love does. It arrives. It stands in the rain outside the school when you've forgotten your umbrella. It waits in hospital corridors during long nights without asking for thanks. It fixes dresses, rides bicycles alongside wobbly wheels, and keeps promises no one else remembers you made. Tonight had been no different. I hadn't been wanted there. She'd made that clear. But love doesn't take attendance only when it's invited. Sometimes, it shows up precisely when it's unwelcome. Because love isn't about comfort, it's about presence. People think presence is loud, that it's a speech, a declaration, a scene. But more often, it's quiet. It's standing in the corner with a cup of coffee while the world turns without you. It's watching someone you care for shine in a light you helped build, even if they never turn to see you standing there. Maybe she'll forget the keys I placed in her hand tonight. Maybe the house will become just another milestone she attaches to someone else in her memory. Maybe my words will fade into the background noise of all the speeches she's heard. But one truth will remain. On the day she asked me not to come, I was already there. Not to prove her wrong, not to make a point, but to keep being what I've always been, her father. And while she may never fully understand it, that will always be enough for me.